All right. Well, welcome everybody. As promised, this is the report on my activities in Kenya a couple of weeks ago. Actually, starting at the very end of 2024, but mostly within 2025. And this is specifically for any supporters that I've had on this. Of course, if you're just interested in the work or you have been prayerful for that, well, then that's fine as well. I know this is a little bit far from my normal time. I like to be I try to be fairly faithful to Mondays at noon, but this Monday at noon, I'd like to get back into teaching a Bible class, and we'll be getting into the life of Christ at that point. So I'd like to get this over with. And of course, if you have any questions or something like that, please don't hesitate to ask. I might not answer necessarily everything, but I try to answer anyway. And also, if you're one of my supporting congregations, you'll also be receiving a letter which will have some of the details that we don't necessarily want to talk about on this platform. But until then, let's go ahead and get started with this. This picture that I'm using in my slideshow, and as you can tell, I'm in a different setup, so I'm trying to make sure everything is just right. But this picture is actually one I took the very first time we went to Kenya, and I've had a couple of close contenders, but I always want to use this picture when I'm talking about Kenya, uh, just because it's so perfect. It has the woman there balancing a couple of Bibles on her head, which is a pretty common practice to, especially among the women, to balance things on your head rather than carry them conventionally. And it also has a pretty good picture of what typically the area we work with looks like. If you look very carefully, you'll notice there's a lot of uh, shiny roofs there. That would be the tin roofs, and mostly those are on mud huts, but some of them are cinder block buildings as well. And we'll talk about the general conditions people live in over there here in a bit. Kenya is a country in Africa. It sits right smack dab on the equator, and it's over on the eastern side of Africa. So if you go all the way to the east, you have cities such as Mombasa, right on the Indian Ocean. The largest city is also the capital, which is Nairobi. That's on the southern end of Kenya. And then on the western end of Kenya, you have just a little bit of Lake Victoria. And it's that area around Lake Victoria where we usually spend most of our time. We got in to Kenya on December, I believe technically it was December 30th, but it was just before midnight when we got in. We stayed one night in Nairobi and we began traveling. Traveling can sometimes take a pretty good while by car in Kenya just because the roads can be pretty inconsistent. Sometimes it's pretty good, other times not so much. But I would say that the traveling probably wasn't all that bad this time around. Now, I should talk about who I'm working with here. This time I went with Brother Zach Barnhart, who is the preacher at the Whitehall Church of Christ. Uh, he is fantastic. He's a little bit of a younger guy, but I met him a few years ago and I was very impressed with him and asked if he'd be interested in going to Kenya with me. This is not his first time out of the country. It's not even his first time out of the country on a mission trip, but it was his first time in Kenya. It was his first time in that whole hemisphere, as a matter of fact. I think the place he had been to before was Costa Rica, if I'm not mistaken, on some trip with Freed. Anyway, he was sort of the traveling companion. He did fantastic, did absolutely everything without complaint, and we certainly put him to work. But he was very good about that. The other fella you see on that top left picture, who in that picture is doing the translation for Zach, is Varun Wasanga. Varun's been a longtime friend of mine. I first met him the first time I went to Kenya back in 2017. His brother Bernard was the one who initially got my dad involved in this particular work. Dad got me involved. And unfortunately, Bernard has since passed away, but Varun has taken over much of what Bernard was doing, and he's doing a fantastic job with it. We absolutely could not do any of this without Varun. He's got a very good mind for the logistics of these things. Of course, he knows much more about what the specific needs are, and so we do very little without asking Varun first. He's very valuable in that. He's the director for the Thomas Music School of Preaching, and he is also the preacher at the Mahuru Bay congregation. That's a congregation I'll talk to you a little bit about later on. But yeah, that's Zach and Varun. Now, when you think of places like, Africa, middle of, especially south of the Sahara, you tend to think of things like this. As I said, this is the fourth time I've been to Kenya, and this is the first time I have ever seen an elephant or a giraffe in Kenya. Those of you who keep up with my Facebook, I have several other pictures of the wildlife that we took over there. And this was taken in Masai Mara, specifically the national park, the game preserve section of it, Masai Mara. I'm still not 100% sure how that looks on like a map necessarily. I don't think it works necessarily exactly like one of our national parks here in America. One of the differences being a significant portion of people live in Masai Mara. You don't have a whole lot of people living in Yellowstone National Park. But I suppose it could be similar because there is the park, but then there's also a greater Yellowstone area, and I do believe you have some people living in that. So maybe it could be compared to that. This is the first time, however, I've actually been within the park itself. There are a few congregations of the Lord's Church among the Maasai. I was kind of hoping that we might get to talk to them. It doesn't always work out that way, so didn't get to see them. But as a consolation prize, we did make a quick stop over at the park. Got to see a lot of animals. That was really cool. Beyond the animals, a lot of the other things you picture when you picture Africa are here, right? The large rolling plains with nothing in them, the lone acacia trees way in the background. Yeah, that's within the park. But that's not really what Africa looks like when you're boots on the ground over there. And to be honest, if you go over on one of these, and this is like a photo safari deal, yes, these are wild animals and you need to give them the respect that they deserve. That being said, they don't really act truly wild. They are extremely used to human contact over there. Many of these, I mean, I'm not, these videos were taken with my phone, right? I don't have a zoom lens or anything like that. That's how close we were. Uh, Honestly, especially with the elephants, this was probably extremely stupid of me to just be hanging out the top of the car. I suppose if that elephant had meant me harm, I would have been harmed. Um, there was one point where we took some pictures of some lions, a couple of lionesses and their cubs. And what had happened is the park rangers, what they do is they go and find wherever because they were sleeping under a tree, they go and find them. They radio to all the people who have cars, and then there's a line of people to see the lionesses. We waited in line to get those pictures. So I hate to disappoint you if you ever do something like this, but it's not going to be quite. You're not going to quite be Steve Irwin, I'm afraid. It's not quite as wild as it looks. And a little bit later, right outside the park, they tried to take us to this little village, which village nobody actually lived there. It was this construction where it's a reconstruction of a traditional Maasai village is what it was, right? You had to pay $25 to get in, and I remember looking over and seeing some tourist with a big camera taking picture of them doing this little jumping dance or whatever, and I'm thinking it ain't real. Um, Now, it's not to say there's no value in seeing a recreation of something like that, right? I've been to places in America where I've seen historical recreations. You know, you go to Colonial Williamsburg or something like that. No, but here's the difference: when you go to Colonial Williamsburg, nobody's under the impression that the people who are dressed up over there actually live like this. I think there are some tourists who are foolish enough to really think this is what it's like. And seeing as I've been to the real deal with the Maasai, and there are some things which are still very interesting over there and very different from what we're used to. Seeing this, it didn't interest me at all. But we don't spend much time with the Maasai. Most of the time we're spending is with the Lua, and it's in a different area. This is a lot more of what you typically see when you go to Kenya. And I took video of two specific spots that kind of show the differences between. The top left is video that was taken in Diwa, which is sort of the nearby town to where Varun lives. There's a lot of little villages, but this one's a little bit more of a town. I couldn't tell you what the population was necessarily, but it's a little bit better populated. And then on the bottom right, you have me, Zach, and then I believe that's two of our friends, Nicholas and Edward, although one of those might be Kabila. It's hard for me to tell from the back of their heads. But we're kind of walking along. You do a whole lot of walking over in Kenya. That bottom right one is what door knocking looks like in Kenya. They've kind of already found some people who are interested in speaking with you, and so you hike out over to wherever they live. It's not a terrible hike. I don't mean it to sound like it's way out in the middle of nowhere compared to town, but you do have to do a little bit of walking. That top left one, part of the reason I took that video is because it's sort of a punchline over here about, oh, my grandfather in the Great Depression, you know what he did to entertain himself? He pushed a hoop along with a stick. Well, it's not that uncommon in Kenya to see kids entertaining themselves by, in this case, it's a bicycle tire, it appears to be, but she's pushing a hoop along with the stick, and that's what's fun over there. And so, yeah, very different from what we're used to over here. This is a picture I took some years ago, and I've always thought that was hilarious. It's a you'll see some very random names of businesses or random words painted on cars or buses. This is WikiLeaks Groceries, a grocery store here, to give you an example of it. I don't know if anyone else actually finds this as funny as I do, but man, I find it funny that they called it WikiLeaks of all things. I actually talked to the owner of that store, asked him, why did you name this place WikiLeaks? He didn't really know. So couldn't tell you. You also might notice, by the way, there's a lot of trash on the ground. When you get into the rural parts of Kenya, there is no trash removal system. People will burn trash if they have to, if it's in like their own yards. But if you're in the middle of town like this, you just sort of throw it down on the ground. Whenever I bring a newcomer to Kenya, that seems to be something that takes them a little while to get over, but you really don't have an option. I think by the very end, I might be telling on Zach a little bit, but I think by the very end, he finally accepted I'm going to have to throw this water bottle on the ground because there's just no other option. Because here's the deal: if he doesn't, somebody else is going to, right? When you get into the cities, it's that kind of changes. Nairobi, they have trash cans. You're not supposed to throw it on the ground. Kisumu, you're not supposed to throw it on the ground. But most of the time, also within the park, you're not supposed to throw it on the ground. But typically, you just sort of throw it where it is. And you can see some more of the trash on the ground there. Very impoverished country, especially when you get into the rural parts. I think I took both of these my first time. Well, maybe not that one on the right. I can't remember when I took that one on the right. I know I took that one on the left my first time, though. That one on the left is a picture of a well being dug and on Bernard's property when he was still alive. You'll notice that there's a rope on there. At the bottom of a rope is one very small man digging that well, and whenever it was time for him to come out, well, he would fill a bucket up, and his buddy would pull the bucket up, and that's how they were digging the well. And when it was time for him to come up, he would just sort of, brace himself against the wall and inch his way up like that. No such thing as OSHA in Kenya. The object on the right that you're seeing is a handmade soccer ball that some children appear to have made from plastic bags. Pretty clever use, honestly, but you know, you don't really see much of that over here, and it kind of puts things into perspective for you. You're not dealing with a place where anybody can just go and buy a soccer ball, and you don't really see many. Of course, soccer is the most popular sport over there, and I very much appreciate, by the way, my Kenyan friends, your consideration of us Americans, because every time they talk about it, they call it soccer. Even amongst themselves, though, they call it football. And I appreciate your appropriate labeling of that sport. Thank you. Oops. A lot of livestock in Kenya as well, and I believe in this presentation I have a little bit later just a small clip to show you what it's like driving through Kenya. But you have, once again, some of these are older pictures, and most of these are very close to where our home base of sorts is, which is in Kalamindi. And that one on the top left is Zach petting a donkey right outside of the Thomas Music School of Preaching. The locals who were watching, by the way, were very tickled by the fact that he wanted to go and pet the donkey. On the top right, you see a couple of goats that are tethered. That's generally how they graze livestock over there. You just take it to some place where there's some long grass, and you put a stake down, and you leave the animal there all day, and then they'll eat everything within that circle, and then you bring them back. Of course, you have lots of chickens. There you have I believe that's a Muscovite duck that looks like it's gonna stare down with that rooster. And on the bottom left, you have a picture of the cow herd, which those are, I believe, Brahmins, and you can see they are very small. They only come up to about your waist. But that belonged to Bernard, and it's his estate with our beloved sister Dorothy, who is his wife. They still have it, so they're doing all right. But the people, of course, is what we're very much concerned with. And, they're living a very different life over there. People typically spend most of their time outside when they can. It's because most of their homes are very small, like air conditioning. Not really much reason to spend all day inside. A lot more people outside in general. Very rare to see many Western conveniences. For example, there's not a whole lot of washing machines or dryers, and so people will wash and dry by hand. And by the way, Dorothy and her family are very kind to us whenever we go visit them. They hand wash our clothing for us, and we're very appreciative of that. A lot of people don't have much to do all day at all. There's the picture on the center right there is a couple of boys who are hoeing for their farm. The bottom right is the only one of these pictures I took this time, and it's because it's the first time that I can remember that I've actually seen a community well in use. You see a lot of women going around, and they'll have those yellow plastic buckets full of water, and they're carrying them home from their head, but I was never quite sure where they're coming from. Well, this is where they're coming from, and as you can see, there's kind of a line to hand pump the water, and this is what they will drink. Speaking of the water, by the way, the rules for us are a little bit different when we go over there. Americans cannot drink Kenyan water, period. And we have to use bottled water for everything. We brush our teeth with bottled water. When we shower, we make sure our mouths are closed. I try to spend very little time with my face in the water, and we don't do any baptisms ourselves. It's a good way to get some disease, which most Kenyans have some sort of immunity to by this point. So, things are different. A lot of children over there, and there is a joke, and first of all, I will admit, it is a funny joke about everybody going to Kenya or a place like it, and they've got to get their white lady picture. You know what I'm talking about? It's when you have one white person and they're surrounded by a couple of dozen of ethnic children of some sort, right? And the jokes usually go about how this white lady or whatever, or anybody, gathered all these children together. Quick, let me take a picture with you. And they're funny, but they're not accurate. These kinds of pictures that I take over there, and I don't think I took many of them personally this time. These are from previous trips once again. But no, you don't have to gather them together. They gather themselves together, and when you break out the camera, they typically get very excited about that. So funny, but not accurate. Again, you have a picture over here of a woman balancing a load of laundry on her head, and she also has her children helping out with that. And once Varun asked me if I thought my wife could do that, and I believe I answer, I don't know anybody whose wife can do that. It's something that they kind of have to be trained for since childhood. And you can even see it in their posture when you look a little closely. I'm telling you that there are so many things that are just different. Even the mannequins are different. They reflect the posture of the average Kenyan versus our mannequins, which reflect the posture of the average American. It's just everything is completely different. People of Kenya are very religious, and typically, especially in the areas that we're in, lean Christian. You see a lot of people in religious garb. Over here, you have a couple of women. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they're affiliated with a local cult known as Legio Maria, which is very Catholic in its aesthetics. They have rosaries and crucifixes and all of that, but they claim that a man named Ondata, I believe, maybe a Kenyan can correct me on that, came and was their Messiah and died and is supposed to rise again. Of course, we know exactly where his body is, and he's still there. But that's one of the cults of Monolua. If these aren't Legio Maria, then I'm guessing they're probably just Catholic, though, and you see many Catholics over there. Living conditions for most Kenyans, when you get into the rural parts, most people are living in mud huts. I take pictures here to show some of the most primitive of those, right? I mean, it doesn't get much more primitive than a thatched roof mud hut. That being said, this is not necessarily representative of what most people are living in. It is mud huts, but usually, as you saw in that first picture, usually they have tin roofs. Occasionally, though, you still see people with the old thatch roof instead. This is a picture I took a long time ago of the inside of one of these thatch roof mud huts, and it's pretty typical. Usually they're divided into two. You kind of have a sleeping quarters, and then you have a living room. There might be some furniture within the living room, and sometimes the only thing dividing one from the other is a sheet like we have over here. And here you can see the thatched roof. You'll notice that even in the thatched roof hut, though, there is electric lighting. They almost always have a solar panel on top, and usually I've had studies with people who are living in thatched roof mud huts, but they have cell phones that are functional. So it's not a straightforward progression of what we tend to think of as far as priorities. And then the insides of these places, this is one I took this time. I've seen the poster before, but I regretfully didn't get a picture of it. I was very glad this time to do it. But often the inside are decorated with, in our minds, what are very random posters, and you're not really quite sure why it's there. You can see that this one has a tin roof, but this is, once again, a mud hut. And yeah, a giant poster with a calendar declaring the royal couples, showing Barack and Michelle Obama. The other two are the former president of Kenya and his wife, by the way. But I've always been tickled by that. I also just noticed I'm almost positive that the amount of stars on that flag for America on the bottom right is wrong. It's certainly out of alignment if it is the correct amount of stars, but uh, whatever. Oh, hey, Varun. Hello, William. A couple of my friends over from Kenya. We've talked about Varun, and he is here with us. By the way, that bottom left flag is the flag of Kenya, if you were wondering about it. All right, so let's start talking about what we actually did. I mentioned that when we first got there, we immediately go to sleep. Next day, we do a little bit of traveling, end up around Masai Mara. We go to the park, do more traveling, and the next day we're over here in this place called Chibunyo. Now, Chibunyo is a very small village, not too far um, from the. Well, you know what? I had it in my head what city it's close to, and I'm blanking out on this one. Um, Often I have trouble remembering a lot of these names. Sometimes it's what, and you'll notice me doing the same thing when I'm talking with the people. There's a lot of times I will remember people's first names and I won't remember their last names. Well, the reason for that is most of them have very English sounding first names, but very African sounding last names. So naturally, it's easier for me to remember the first name than the last name. But Chibunyo's in this area. Bomet, that's the name of the city that it's pretty close to. Bomet and the area around it, it's a area we've recently been very pleased with the direction it's gone. They have been dealing with certain amounts of liberalism within the church. By the way, we're not talking about political liberalism. If you don't know, we're talking about a scriptural liberalism, which can be a serious problem. But Chibunyo and a few of these other congregations are among these stronghold of scripturality. Maybe that's a better word than liberal. Unscriptural would probably be the better word here. They're a stronghold of scripturality in that area, and they are doing a fantastic job. They are growing. They are helping establish new congregations. They got a school of preaching over in Bomet, and we get to meet with some of the preachers over there. In fact, many preachers from that area and from the school, they came over to Chibunyo to meet with us. We were very happy to see them. And boy, there's there. By the way, to my Kenyan friends, if I start dropping names and I don't mention your name, it's not because you're not important. It's just because there's a whole lot of people to mention, and so I'm going to actually try to avoid mentioning a whole lot of specific people. But we got the opportunity over here in Chibunyo to go and preach to them. We did 3 sermons. I preached one, Zach preached one, and Varun preached one. We had lunch with them. It was a great opportunity. They got to talk to us about some of the needs over there and what they've been doing. Again, supporting congregations. You might see a little bit more about that. And it was just very nice to see them again. They were very friendly and welcoming. We moved on. Oh, and by the way, the people in this area, they're a tribe called the Kalenjin. Now, the Kalenjin are a little bit different than most. To my understanding, they're different than most of the tribes. In fact, let me rewind a little bit because I haven't described what the tribes are like over in Kenya. There are a lot of tribes in Kenya. There's a couple of dozen, if I'm not mistaken. But at least one museum basically divided into three different divisions, which were the Luo, or the Luo, Luo, the Kalenjins, and then all the rest. And the reason it's divided that way is because the Luo and the Kalenjins are not originally from this area, while the rest of the tribes fall under the Bantu group, which is the same as the Swahili or the Maasai. The Kalenjin and the Luo are Nilots, meaning that they're originally from what's Sudan now, right? They follow the Nile River down to the Lake Victoria area, and of those 2 Nilotic tribes, the Luo kind of stay near Lake Victoria, and the Kalenjin come up here near the Rift Valley. Um, the Kalenjin also, according to Varun, whenever you see one of these fantastic long distance runners from Kenya, he says they're usually Kalenjin. Although apparently a few non-Kalenjins are starting to break into that as well. Also, one more tidbit: apparently Kalenjin is a very difficult language. Now, of course, to me, it's all a difficult language, but normally when people are singing in their native languages. And most people in Kenya, by the way, speak three languages. They usually speak their tribal language, they usually speak Swahili, and they usually speak English. Now, there are exceptions. Everybody speaks their own tribal language, right? But the Swahili seems to me to be a close second. Most people don't have trouble with that. But occasionally you'll run into someone who only speaks their tribal language. This is usually a very young child or a very old woman. And the reason it's old women and children is because back in the day, girls didn't go to school, right? Which is where people are learning Swahili, which is the national language of Kenya, and they're learning English, which has a lot of benefits as well. That being said, don't think because a lot of people speak English, communication is easy. It certainly isn't. There are two big factors which make communication difficult, despite the fact that theoretically almost everybody speaks English. Problem number one is that a lot of people aren't truly fluent, right? And some people are just better in English than others. And problem number two is there is a very strong Kenyan dialect of English that has developed over the years, and it is so different than a lot of the things that we hear, and my dialect is so different than what they're used to that even if I would have an easy time communicating with somebody from Britain or Australia or something like that, in Kenya it can be a little different. Things that started off, I believe, as maybe even common mistakes of the English language. For example, when you're over in Kenya and you want to ask what's that, often people would say, and what is this one, right? Which is just different enough to throw you off a little bit. But it's so common there that that's the correct way to say it over there, right? And as a result of the dialect, and as a result of not everyone's quite as strong in English and they're not confident, communication can be very difficult. But you know, when you run into somebody who is confident in their English and who is able to kind of make out your accent, and I get this habit when I'm over there that I kind of change. I have a what do they call it? Code switching, when you kind of change your accent. I kind of code switch a little bit to speak. Besides speaking very slowly and clearly, sometimes I'll take on a couple of Kenyan mannerisms, and I think that's fairly common. As this time I met a guy who had been in Kenya for 4 years, and he talked like a Kenyan, even though he was from Kansas. So people will do that. But anyway, yeah. So this is an area with the Kalenjins, and we only got to spend about a half a day with them. But I'm thinking maybe in future trips I'd like to spend maybe more time up here. We will see. Oh, here's that video I told you about what driving is like in Kenya. Now, this is not all of the time, and not all the roads are dirt. Sometimes they're paved, sometimes they're dirt. If they're paved, there's a good chance though that they're absolutely filled with potholes. And often you do have some animal. No, by the way, if you're looking at this and you're worried, no animals were harmed in the making of this video. But man, they got it really close to being harmed in the making of this video. I have never seen Varun hit an animal, but I don't know how. It's just everything always feels like it's about this close from getting hit, but perhaps they would feel the same way if they came over here. I don't know. You do have a lot of dirt roads, by the way. This is, I believe, I took this on the way back from Mahuru Bay, and even though it's not that far as a crow flies, you get a lot of roads like this, and that's about a 2.5 hour drive between the two. Oh, Dato. Okay. I can't remember exactly what I said, but Varun helped me out there, so I appreciate that. All right, let's talk about Kalamindi. Kalamindi acts as our home base. In the top left, you see an old picture I took of the Kalamindi Church of Christ. You'll notice it's a very good, sturdy building, but it's not necessarily extravagant, which I think is good. It's a good building, but there's not a lot of wasted money either. The Calamity congregation is highly supported by the Dewey Avenue Church of Christ. And so, for those of my friends over there, you might want to pay some special attention over here. The pulpit preacher at Calamity is a man named Richard Orocco. He's a good friend of mine, very wise preacher, and very good at his job. But they also have a few associates over there. I didn't get pictures of all of them, but I do have a picture on the right with one of my good friends over there. That's Edward Muga and his family. And it tends to act as our home base. This is the hometown for Varun and Bernard. And before he died, Bernard had an addition put in his house specifically to house guests such as yours truly. So it makes a pretty good spot for us. You can't see it in the picture, but directly behind my angle as a photographer on the top left would be the Thomas Music School of Preaching, where we also did some work. But Calamity sort of acts as the home base. I've probably done more door-to-door evangelism in this area than anywhere else, and we put a lot of work in Calamity. The bottom left is actually somebody I want you to be thinking about. We do a lot of these. I can't remember exactly what our final count of personal Bible studies was, but it was high. Let me see if I can find that. 43. Between Zach and I, we did 43 Bible studies in this time, and so some people tend to stick out to you a little bit more than others. The bottom left is somebody for you to be prayerful for. This is a man named Martin. Martin struck me as a very intelligent man, and as we were reasoning from him from the scriptures, he would listen very carefully. His English was very good as well, so we didn't require translation. And he was convinced, yeah, I need to be baptized, but I believe at this time he is yet to do it. And Varun, there must be a little bit of a delay because I'm getting answers to these things, and Varun just helped me out with Bomet, but I remembered that one. But Martin, he was a very thoughtful guy. As they say over there, he had accepted the teaching, but he was not baptized. Now, I don't push for immediate baptism as hard as some of the other guys do. And while this is an urgent matter, and I make sure always to say that, I don't think a lot of guys will push for that much harder than I will. And the reason I don't is I think it helps with your sincerity. Brooke and I once sat through a sales pitch with some guy, and it was going to be a pretty expensive investment if we were going to do it. But we were thinking positively towards it. But towards the end of it, we were mentioning, okay, well, let's give us some time to sleep on this, and we'll come back to you. And immediately, the guy becomes visibly frustrated with us, and he's pushing really hard. Now, the thing we were looking for was not something urgent at all, and honestly, that made us suspicious more than anything else. Why can't we think about this? If you're selling something that is good and something that we really should get, why is it a problem that we want to wait and think about this before committing to it? I kind of think in a similar way when it comes to Bible studies. I don't want to give the impression that I'm trying to get somebody to commit to something that they might hugely regret. And let's face it, putting on Christ through baptism, it is a huge life change. And if it weren't for the fact that we're such an urgent matter, I would encourage people, take your time, think about this hard. So I think that can be a frustration sometimes, but to others who want to push a little bit harder. But I didn't push him too awfully hard. But last I heard from him, he still hadn't made the decision, and the reason being he didn't want to do it without his wife. Now, I had got him to say that, okay, if you talk to your wife about this and she still doesn't want to be baptized, Jesus said, I came not to bring peace but a sword, that I came to make a man's enemies those of his own household. And even if your wife doesn't come along, you have the responsibility. And he said, yes, I understand that. And his children too. And I got a picture of them as well, but I preferred this picture because the one on the bottom left was taken candidly. And I like that one a whole lot. It kind of shows Martin's personality a little bit better. He's one of these guys who doesn't smile for photographs. And so if you saw the official photograph we took with his family, you might think he was a grumpy looking guy. But that picture is much more representative of who he is as a person. And unfortunately, we never were able quite to get him baptized. But I've been very prayerful because I can tell he's an honest guy. But some of the guys over there are worried about his wife's influence on that. I can't pretend that there's no wisdom whatsoever, by the way, in saying it would be better if my whole family were to be baptized. He's right. That is the best way for this to happen, but it'd be better, you know, it's tough. It's tough to make that decision. But the men over there are very good at what they do. They're going to be following up with him. And I've also requested Dad, who's going to be going next month. If he has the time, I'm going to see if he can go see Martin as well. I really hope that Martin ends up being baptized. The Calamendi Church has a program as well. Once again, for my Dewey Avenue friends that you might be interested in, they have a program where they support many of the local orphans. According to Varun, they're in the process of outlawing orphan homes in Kenya. Now you hear that and you think, what on earth? Why would you ever do that? Well, this is why you do that. It's because there are so many people who make orphan homes and then they turn them into giant scams, right? I've established an orphan home. Now I'm going to go solicit some rich Westerners or whatever and keep all the money for myself, and the orphans aren't going to see a bit of it. Unfortunately, that happens a lot. I'm not sure the solution to that is to outlaw the orphan home, but the system they're trying to change to is that of a foster system, and that's what these kids are going with. In fact, I think it's a very good system they have over in Calamendi. My understanding is that the sponsor parents to these orphans, they usually are widows. So you pair the widows with the orphans, and the widows kind of take care of them, and and then you help the widows out. And so they are given clothes, they were given soap, they were given food. They are well taken care of over there, and so you have a picture there. By the way, I mentioned Richard Oroko, that's him on the right. And then on the left, that's the man. He seems to kind of head up the logistics of this. His name is Bernard as well. That's not the same as our late brother Bernard Kaga. This is another man named Bernard. But there you have a picture of some of the orphans over there. I mentioned there's a better picture there with Martin. I don't know why I used the same picture twice, but there's Martin over there on the left, and there was another man that I'd studied with in Calamendi. His name is Peter Osuri, and we did convince Peter to be baptized. He didn't want to be baptized quite immediately, but we were persistent with him. And eventually, and you might think, well, did you just harangue him into getting baptized? No, because eventually he shows up over at Bernard's compound and wanting to talk. And so we did. That's Edward, by the way, baptizing him. As I said, we don't usually, we try to avoid doing the baptisms ourselves. I should also mention, even in America, I don't like getting on motorcycles. I think it was a combination of when I was a kid. Twice I burnt my knee on my dad's motorcycle exhaust. That kind of turned me off to the idea. And then as I got older, I realized, and maybe this is a fluke, but I kind of realized I know as many people who have died in motorcycle accidents as people who have died in car accidents. And when you consider how much more time people spend in the car and how many more people are in cars than they are on motorcycles around here, the fact that those two would be the same is a problem. So I just don't like motorcycles myself. I try to avoid them. But, so that's over here. But in Kenya, everything's worse when it comes to motorcycles, right? Passengers to motorcycles don't wear helmets. I have seen up to 5 people on one motorcycle before. I've seen people hauling couches on motorcycles. I've seen people hauling coffins on motorcycles before. Uh, Totally different motorcycle culture, and a motorcycle is a second-class citizen on the Kenyan roads. They do not get the same rights on that, and so you have to. If you're on the motorcycle and a car's coming up behind you, you gotta get off the road or you're gonna die. There's not a lot of options on that. So I don't like getting on motorcycles, but they persuaded me to do it here. Edward drove me down because it was getting dark. We didn't have much time, and we had to get Peter baptized. Daggone it. Okay, fine. But I walked back. It's not. They were worried about it, but it's not really that bad of a walk. It's not even a mile, I don't think. But it was very good to have Peter baptized. Sunday, Zach and I split up. Zach stayed over in Kalamindi, Varun. His family and I, we drove that 2.5 hours to Mahura Bay, which is on Lake Victoria. And here you have the Mahura Bay Church of Christ, who, by the way, they send their greetings. And by the way, you might be thinking, if you're a Kenyan, hey, we told DJ to send our greetings. The Kenyans send their greetings. There's the general, there's the general version of it, because I have so many things like that I have to remember. I can't possibly remember all of it. So once again, if I skip, I apologize. I'm not trying to. But there you have a few members of Mahura Bay. It's a very pretty community, and if you have a clear day like this, Lake Victoria can be very beautiful. And then you remember it's full of hippos, and I don't want to be anywhere near it when I think about that. But you know, it is beautiful over there. So I preached over at Mahura Bay. We got to visit an older man over there who was his name is Daniel, and he kind of forged a connection with my dad, because this man's name is Daniel and he's married to a woman named Mary, and my dad's name is Daniel and he's married to a woman named Mary, and so there was a little bit of a connection there, I suppose. But we got to visit Daniel. Daniel's been sick, and I had never met him before, but to my understanding, he is slowly on the mend, which we're very grateful for. The people of Mahura Bay were very welcoming to me as well, and they sent the message that, well, let me see here, because I wrote this one down. So the ladies of Mahura Bay specifically told me to greet the ladies of the church over in America. So here's a greeting. And they requested women teachers as well to come over and teach, which we've been able to do in the past. This time around, I wasn't quite able to make it work, but I would very much like that to happen. So there's your call to action. There's also a couple of, I guess we would describe them as associate preachers over at Mahura Bay. And they're doing some good work. They made mention that they could possibly use motorcycles over there. The reason being that they can hold gospel meetings and be able to, spread out a little bit. All right. Let's see here. Oh, Nguku. Okay. Nguku. This is where we probably spent our most evangelism time. It's a village nearby Kalamindi. It's probably only about a 10-minute drive or so. Nguku is, and the preacher over there is a man named Peter Lecce. As you can see from the picture on the left, by the way, Spot Zach. It's kind of like the opposite of Where's Waldo, isn't it? But they meet under a tree in Peter Lecce's yard. Now, a problem we kind of run into, and I think it's very charming to have a congregation that meets under a tree, but as you can imagine, by the way, we were there in the dry season, so it wasn't that bad, but you can imagine that weather makes a big problem for that. And it does actually bring some issues when you're trying to study with people. For whatever reason, people have a real problem often with meeting not in a legitimate building. And I've had studies with people, and I showed them, look, the first century Christians weren't meeting in buildings, they were meeting in people's houses. Those under persecution, they had to meet in hiding, sometimes in catacombs. But you can really overcome a big hurdle if you are at a if you have a building over there. And so maybe that's something we'll be able to work with him in the future. But the preacher over there, Patrick Leach. Patrick Leach, not Peter Leach. Patrick, he does very good work over there, and we spend a lot of time evangelizing. So this is what our work at Nguku looked like. We would go over in the morning, and the students at the Tom's Music School of Preaching, they'd all pile into one truck, such as this, and looks safe, doesn't it? The truck, and they would all come over here, and we would walk down to this area, and we would meet quickly to go over the plan, and then we would all split up and do some door knocking. I call it door knocking, but that's sort of a loose term. You never really knock on a door if you want to greet. You just sort of come near the house and you yell "Hody," which I guess means knock knock, and usually they're kind of expecting you already, but you go in and you study with them. And this is where most of our Bible studies happen. So that's what we would do in the morning. Then we would regroup and we would go over to the town center, which does have paved road at least. And that big truck, you can't see it in this picture, but it's got a couple of loudspeakers that Varun had hooked up on that. And we would just have an open air meeting right there. Most of the time, Zach and I would speak, but other times there were others who spoke as well. And we did get some interesting responses like that as well. We also had a few baptisms at Nguku, which we were very pleased with. I mentioned that with that first baptism with Peter, they convinced me to get on the motorcycle, and it's about the only reason you can get me to get on the motorcycle, which was when it was involved with, when I get to be involved with soul saving in some way or another. Another time they got me on a motorcycle was in the way into Nguku when the truck that Varun has broke down, and we had to get in. Oh, good. Varun just mentioned that he was there to follow up with Martin, so they're doing the work over there. Unfortunately, he didn't get the chance to see him because he wasn't home, but there you go. That just shows the good work the men over there are doing. But we go over here, truck breaks down, only option is motorcycle. They tried to put Zach as the third man on a motorcycle. I was not having that, and they thought I was being ridiculous, and they just sort of laughed it off, though, and Zach and I go into town. No more than two at a time on a motorcycle. Wasn't happy about it, though. And we go over there, we do some evangelism, and luckily we get some people respond and wanting to be baptized. Wonderful. But the truck's broken down. So Zach told me to take this picture just to show, yeah, look how dangerous this is, and they do this all the time. Ha 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 ha. Here's video of me on that exact same truck. Once again, for the only reason, that's Richard on the bottom right there, and you can see very clearly the speakers that are on there as well, which were used for the open air preaching. We took him over to a watering hole to get baptized, and this is about the only way you would have gotten me to do something like this. So these are the two women we baptized over there, and their names, I know their names are Linda and Sarah. It's always the last name that gets it a little bit. That's Linda and Sarah Amondi. Sarah's Linda's daughter. Very bizarre set of circumstances that led to this one. We were still grateful for it. But Patrick, his nephews were there, and I was told to go ahead and study with them, and so we studied with them for a long time, and they realized one in particular, and his name was Byron, and he understood that he needed to be baptized. Well, great, let's go baptize you. Well, I'd rather be baptized with my wife. Okay, well, like I said with Martin, I'm not going to pretend that there's no wisdom to that whatsoever. So he takes us to go study with his wife. It was his idea. You bring this teaching to her. Okay. So we go, and his sister-in-law is there as well, and we study with them. And they all accept the teaching. Once again, as they say in Kenya, they accept the teaching. But Byron and his wife won't be baptized. Byron has something else to do, apparently, on that day. Um, and nobody wants to be baptized on that day. Well, I thought, well, we'll see. But it was very bizarre, especially with Byron. I told him, "You're like a man who's having surgery done on him." And while we were in the conversation, he was talking about potentially going to preaching school. And I said, well, hey, that would be wonderful, but we need to take one step at a time. You know, you're like a man who's having surgery, and you say to the surgeon, man, you're doing some great work over here. I'd like to be a surgeon too. Can I, here, let me use a scalpel on my wife who also needs this. And I'm thinking, that's great, but let me finish the surgery on you first, and then, recover, and then you can help others as well. But very strange, bizarre incident. But I think on an intellectual level, Byron absolutely understands what he needs to do. I think there might be a little bit of hesitation on his part because we keep finding excuses. The last day I was there, I went and found Byron, and we were this close to getting him to be baptized. I mean, literally, we were out walking with him, and then we said, "Oh, by the way, go grab a different set of clothes so you can change into them after you get baptized." And then he just doesn't leave his house. We go back, and he says he's talked with his wife, and he wants to wait until she's baptized as well. I'm still hopeful. I really hope Byron decides to put on the gospel. I've heard no news on this, and I hope he does. The men over there who are working, they're very much motivated to follow up with him. Very intelligent guy, so I hope so. But luckily, on the next day after we had studied with Byron and his family, Linda and her daughter Sarah, they decide, yes, we want to be baptized. Great, wonderful. Now this is probably the one I was most happy with. This is Edwin Oching. Now, what they described to me the situation in Nguku, there's a preacher over there, Patrick, but he said basically the whole congregation, it's being supported by two very strong individuals, two men, and the other man had recently died. In fact, just before Varun came and picked us up, he had attended the funeral for this man. And in the course of our studies and stuff, we at one point got to go to the man's house. His wife wasn't a Christian, but we visited with her, and then their son shows up, and we get to talk with them a little bit. Later, we're speaking with that man's mother, who she had kind of stopped attending services because there wasn't a building for Nguku, and she was nice enough, and we talked with her, and she said, "Yeah, I'll start coming again." But once again, Edwin, the son of the man who died, he shows up. And we're kind of wrapping things up. I'm with Richard, and Richard turns over to Edwin, and he says, and what have you, young man, have you been baptized? And Edwin said, not yet. When you say something like that, here's your word of warning. When you say something like that, that makes my gears start turning, right? Because that tells me that you on an intellectual level, you're there. You just haven't motivated yourself. I asked him, okay, so do you know that you need to be baptized? He says, yeah. Did your father teach you that? Yeah. When did he teach you it? 2 years ago. Okay. You've known what you need to do for 2 years. Why do you keep waiting? And we keep on like this for some time. And you could tell, once again, we weren't twisting his arm or anything like that, but we were just talking about it. If you've known what to do for 2 years, you've had time to consider. Why are you still waiting? And we eventually convinced him to be baptized. I never knew his father, but I imagine he'd be very proud of him on this one. And so we were very, very pleased that Edwin made that decision. By the way, I had to once again go on a motorcycle to be present for this baptism. But, I think it was worth it. So overall, our work in Nguku was very satisfying. I think a lot of good is being done over in Nguku, and I hope much more is done. Thomas Music School of Preaching. Most of these photos, once again, are older, including in that picture you see Varun, and this is an older picture of Varun's son, Earl Craig Jr. Ask me why his name is Earl Craig Jr. at some point. I don't have time at the moment. But that picture on the right is the most recent picture I have of the Thomas Music School of Preaching. The reason I made sure to get that is because there's a building over there on the left that is their new kitchen. Some of you, I think, were involved in helping them to fund that kitchen. It was sort of an emergency need, a new government requirement, and they managed to do that, and we were very pleased with that. But Zach and I would teach classes over at Thomas Music. Here's a picture of Zach teaching his class on Galatians. We both taught Monday through Thursday. Both of them were 3-hour classes. I started my class at 6 o'clock and it went through 9 o'clock. We would then go and go to Nguku and go through that routine I told you about. We would come back and Zach would start teaching Galatians once again from 6 to 9. These students were very proud of them. They were working hard from 6 in the morning until 9 in the evening. They were working, so very pleased with what they were doing there. Zach taught Galatians, and I taught church history. Here's a picture of the library at the Thomas Music School of Preaching. They need some help with that library now. You look at it; it looks kind of decent, but if you look a little closer, you might notice that most of these books are just copies of the same one, and so there's a lot of help that they could use over there. And this is in a different corner of the room. That's the room showing the computer lab. We're also very much hoping for an updated computer lab over there. I'm kind of the opinion that the computer lab's the way to go. Money is not the only issue when it comes to the library. Part of the issue is transportation, right? A lot of the good books that we could put in there, they tend to originate in America. Well, it's very difficult to ship over to Kenya. There's a lot of corruption in the Kenyan mailing system, and so there's a good chance you lose whatever you try to ship over there. So I'm sort of the opinion that computer lab is kind of the way to go in the future. Varun has talked about plans, perhaps. Has talked about plans to perhaps make it a little bit. What's the word I'm looking for? Starlink. He's talking about maybe putting Starlink in, and if you can put some modern computers in there, I think that would be a great way to help with to help with the issue of just not a lot of access to books over there. And so I'm sort of the opinion that's the best way forward, because you can get ebooks and you can put it on the computer. I asked if the students could put it on their cell phones. Varun thinks there would be a memory problem with that, but hopefully, and if you're interested, maybe we can get a little work done over there. There is a little bit more to say, but it's not necessarily appropriate to talk about it over Facebook. So hey, if you have any questions, please feel free to message me, and maybe you'll see a little bit more about that as well. Anyway, that's just a quick overview of what's going on in Kenya. A lot of really exciting stuff over there. It is so refreshing to have so many people who are willing to study the Bible with you, and it's just so nice, and not everybody who studies gets baptized. Not everybody who studies does what they ought to, but at least you can very commonly have very serious discussions about this, which are not muddled with a lot of the irrational religious thought which plagues us over in the West. That's one of my favorite things about going over to Kenya, is just that you can talk very easily and honestly about the Bible. And in my opinion, the fields are white over in Kenya. So for those of you who have been supporters in this, or who are interested in supporting in the future, thank you so much, and please keep this in your prayers, because it's a very good work that's going on. All right. That's what I got to say about Kenya. 1 hour and 3 minutes, not too awful bad. This Monday at noon, we will return to our lunchtime study. Until then, I love you all, and have a wonderful day.